All right, so from a high level, we are doing these panels across the summer. So we've got 2 more planned after this to allow districts to share their experience in building out an instructional framework. To give you a bit more context for this grant that we introduced yesterday, called the Strong Foundations Math and Literacy Framework Development Grant. From the highest level, this grant is really meant to provide a foundational planning support that's aligned to the research and the TEKS to help districts build out the why behind instructional changes for all stakeholders within your district. A couple quick hits on what this grant provides you. Again, from the highest level, the goal of this grant is that districts and charters can actually walk away from this grant program with the new instructional framework specific to math or literacy in this first option. And that framework is rooted in research and aligned to the TEKS. And the grant itself is going to provide a variety of supports to help districts get there in the form of a collective learning process, which I'm sure Dr. Davis will talk about a lot today, providing some change management and project management support, giving access to exemplars so that folks can turnkey some of these resources and make it fit their local context, building communities of practice. So similar to what we're doing today, districts can learn from each other and their experiences. And then there's a couple other components to this grant in terms of providing some flexible funding to help support travel, stipends, and other expenses. And then this will allow you to have some priority to future TEA grants for math and literacy supports. Again, lots more information was shared out at the webinar yesterday, so I encourage you to go back and look at that webinar. And we also have all of this up on our Strong Foundations website, which we'll share in the chat here at the end of our session today. Just to root us where we're at, so I mentioned at the beginning of this that we're going to have several learning opportunities over the course of the summer during this grant application period. So we are here at this first box. This is our first district panel that we're kicking off. And just wanted to put it on y'all's radar that we've got lots of other things running this summer. In addition to 2 more panels, we'll have some learning opportunities where districts can learn a little bit more about the research that you'll actually be learning and going through in a collective learning series through this grant. And we're going to kick those off this week too. So we've got lots of opportunities and lots of timelines to make it work for your district of some ways that you can learn more about this grant. All right, so for today, like I mentioned, we are going to start with some introductions. And then I will turn it over to Dr. Todd Davis to do an overview of Aldine ISD's instructional framework creation. And then the second half will just be some time for you guys to ask questions. So as he's talking, I encourage you guys to drop questions into the chat, be jotting them down so that second half, we can open it up to be more conversational and field questions that you guys have as well. And then we'll spend a couple minutes at the end just closing and circling back on some of those opportunities coming up this summer. All right, so I'm going to jump into introductions. My name is Leslie Hesketh. I'm the Director of Adoption Strategy here at TEA. My team oversees this grant and sits within our Instructional Materials and Implementation division within the agency. And then I'll turn it over to Dr. Todd Davis to do a quick intro of himself as well.
All right, thank you, Leslie. Hello, everyone. My name is Todd Davis. I'm the Chief Academic Officer, as you can see, in Aldine ISD. I am going into my 4th year in this role, but this will be my 31st year in Aldine. Started in Aldine as a 4th grade teacher, and I have been assistant principal, elementary principal, middle school principal. I was a principal supervisor, supervised a vertical team, pre-K through 12 for many years, and then also our high school when we changed to a horizontal supervision. In 2018, I believe it was, 2018, I moved into the role of Chief Academic Officer. And a lot of exciting things have happened in those last 4 years, and happy to share with you. And thank you for being here. It's always an honor to be able to share our journey through the literacy frameworks and our adoption of high quality instructional materials.
Awesome. So we are going to go ahead and dig in. And I didn't run through some Zoom logistics, but just as a heads up, this is a meeting format, so we can all come off mute and hear each other chat. So just make sure if you are not speaking that you are on mute so that we can hear what's being said, and then definitely leverage the chat. So drop questions in there, comments. I want this process to be very conversational as we're going, and it definitely will be more towards the end as we can open it up for more questions. But please feel free to actively use the chat as we're going and let me know if you'll have any questions. For this first half, like I mentioned, we're going to open it up to Todd to just do a high-level overview of what Aldine has done in developing their previous instructional frameworks. So he's going to hit some high points, and I'm sure other things as well that kind of start around why they engaged in this work and what got them interested in starting to build an instructional framework and some of the benefits of having a framework built. The committee building process, if you were at our webinar yesterday, you know that this is a big component of building out a strong instructional framework, of actually gathering that committee and taking that committee through the collective learning process, as well as actually drafting, iterating, and voting on a final framework. The timeline of that, so we mentioned a couple different timelines that this grant has, but there's also some really important implications that he can share today that Aldine considered as they were building out their literacy and math frameworks. And then I'm sure there's a ton of other things that we'll get to in questions, so please drop any of your wonderings or questions as we're going in the chat. But I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to him.
Okay, thank you, Leslie. Before I begin, just a little bit of context about Aldine. If you are not aware of where Aldine is or who we serve in Aldine, I think it might be helpful to this conversation. We are an urban district just north of Houston ISD, northern part of Houston. We serve a population of approximately 61,000 students. We have 82 campuses. Our students are predominantly Hispanic. We have 74% of our students Hispanic, 23% African American. 42% of our students are emergent bilingual students, high population, and 9 out of 10 of our students in Aldine are economically disadvantaged. So as we get into this, one of the benefits that we had when we entered our journey into building a literacy framework that has resulted in a math framework, a science framework, social studies framework, a multilingual or bilingual programming framework, and an early learning framework. And I can briefly speak to all of those, I guess, if necessary. But one of the benefits that we had when we entered into this process was we were able to partner with a philanthropic agency here in Houston to provide some of the resources necessary to enter into this year-long collective learning and development of a literacy framework, vision and framework. They helped us quite extensively with resources and helped us connect with outside partnerships. This was back in 2018, prior to really the emergence of outside partners in Aldine for certain, but Texas to some degree. And they connected us with TNTP that really helped us through this process. So just a little bit of context there. But now, what was the catalyst to us developing a vision framework? Back again in 2018, we had just completed a curriculum audit in Aldine ISD. A comprehensive audit. And in that audit, it became very clear that our current literacy curriculum, which was the Lucy Calkins units of study, we were a self-professed balanced literacy district through and through. But what that curriculum audit showed us was that, number one, that the curriculum in many regards was not aligned, pointed out some really alarming misalignment. It also showed us, of course, that the results of our students were tragic, I'd say. At that time, we had 31% of our students, third graders, who were reading at a MEETS level on STAR. But even more alarming was that during this audit, they visited over 800 classrooms in Aldine ISD. And in those classrooms where they were just looking for the presence of the curriculum and then the presence of the curriculum implemented with fidelity, they found that in less than 15% of the classrooms was the curriculum actually being done with fidelity. And outside of that it was just teachers scrambling to do whatever they felt was necessary. And unfortunately, it was a lot of STAR, a lot of drill and kill. And of course, they saw absolutely no semblance of early foundational support for our early learners. So that coupled with a new superintendent coming to town really was our catalyst to knowing that we needed to go a different direction with literacy instruction. We knew it was the gateway, that we needed to begin with literacy, but we knew we needed to do something differently. Now, what we didn't know was what to do. We didn't know what direction to go. Again, at that time, and I can only speak for myself and I can only speak for Aldine, the science of reading was not on our radar at all. HQIM had no idea what that was. And so thankfully, when we were able to meet up and partner with TNTP, they were able to kind of hold our hand and guide us through this process. But what I did know, though, was that because we had leadership, literacy leadership, that was so rooted in balanced literacy that I could not do a hard shift to a new curriculum or a new way of practice when it came to literacy. And I also knew that there was a lot of Aldine pride that had lingered. In Aldine, back in 2009, we won the Broad Prize for urban education in the nation, and that pride lingered, even though our student results didn't match that award, but that pride still kind of lingered in Aldine. So I knew I could leverage that. So what we decided to do was to bring a group of literacy leaders, an eclectic group of individuals. And in our district, it was about 50 people from, again, many different roles: teachers, coaches, principals, school principal supervisors. I mean, it was a very large group of people that we brought together. And I knew that we needed to study best practice and research in literacy. The ultimate goal of this study, which we eventually called the collective learning, was to develop a vision and framework for literacy instruction. Because I knew if we were able to develop a vision and a framework for literacy instruction in Aldine, leveraging that kind of Aldine pride, like I said, that still lingered, that could be the foundation, that could be that core piece that could bring us through the change process. Like I said, we had people that were, even though the results showed we needed to go a new direction, were so deeply rooted in balanced literacy that I needed to have this framework as that anchor as we pulled people into a new direction. So again, I went to TNTP and I basically said to them, help us find a new way forward. And we were able to partner with them, and they were able to guide us through a 6-month process, 6 meetings of our literacy task force once a month for 6 months, and really guided us through deep learning around the science of reading. And what was so beneficial for me was that I needed to be number one, very vulnerable, and knowing that I didn't have that vision, I didn't know the direction forward, and that I was able to sit back and be a learner as well in this process. And I think as I look back on that, the vulnerability from leadership in Aldine became such a very important piece of us being able to bring people into this new direction. So we were able to then embark in this study. It was life-changing, I guess, not to be too dramatic, but it was really exciting, and it really opened our eyes to new practice. But when we completed the collective learning, we then brought together a smaller group, kind of a core group of the task force. And let me revisit the task force for a minute before I get into the core. I think it's very important, if you enter into this and you do something similar, to be very, very strategic about who you bring to that task force. And whether you're a small district and you have a team of half a dozen, or you're a larger district like us and you have a team of 50 or more, it's very important that you don't bring all your yes people, and you don't bring all your people who are just geared for change. You want to bring the other side of the group in as well. And then you also want to make sure that you're bringing people that at the conclusion of this process have high levels of credibility and respect in your district, because they're going to be your champions. They're going to be the key players in this change process and the communication. So you want to make sure that you've got the right people who can stand in front of different populations in your district. You need to have coaches, you need to have teachers who can stand and speak to those populations. But most importantly, you need to have your principals who have a great deal of influence and respect from their peers, because it is their voice that becomes so powerful in this change process moving forward. Now, getting to the core group, after we did our collective learning, and then we got to the core group did a lot of the reflective study, and basically their job was to, now let's take all of the new learnings and let's develop our vision and then our framework for literacy instruction. And then that group's responsibility was to take it back to the larger group for feedback. And then ultimately we were going to conclude the process after a year-long study. it took us into late April and early May before we had a final product that we were able to basically take the word draft off of and move forward. Our vision and framework, and I believe you can find it on our website and maybe provided by TEA, I'm not quite sure this time, but our vision and framework is, of course, a vision statement for literacy instruction. It has 4 key tenets that frame the framework. But in addition to that, though, we've written out assurances, we've written out commitments, and we've written out role responsibilities in relation to the framework. So what is the responsibility of a teacher? What's the responsibility of a coach, a principal, responsibilities of district leadership, and then ultimately, what is the responsibility of a student? So that basically frames out, fleshes out our framework for literacy instruction. What we did at that point then was, what was very important was we needed to develop a communication plan. We needed to start communicating this out broadly through the district. We did short kind of webinars like I'm doing here. We did study groups. We did daily email blasts. But as we were communicating on our framework, we also knew that we needed to actualize this framework. This needed to live and breathe within our classrooms, and that meant that we needed to adopt a curriculum. And so the core task force, the core team of the task force went out and sought out districts throughout the nation that actually were implementing curriculum that represented the science of reading. We went to Tennessee, spent most of our time in Tennessee, visiting districts there, and that's when we saw 3 or 4 different curricula that represented the science of reading. And what we were most impressed with is when we saw students, just lost the name of the district, but they were deeply involved with the Amplify CKLA curriculum. And we were just so impressed with the level of vocabulary, the discourse, the strong foundational piece that we were seeing that was consistent and really coherent throughout the district. So what we did at that point, and this is now getting into late May of that year, we adopted CKLA as our curriculum for literacy. We adopted it full scale. There was no piloting. We did pre-K through 5 for elementary, and then we also did a curriculum called Wit and Wisdom for 6 through 8 at that time. So we went full scale, high quality instructional materials in 2019 from pre-K through 8 in Aldine ISD. Then of course the pandemic hit, but we didn't slow down. We kept moving. We continued to adopt and actually saw a great deal of investment and commitment to the curriculum very, very quickly. And I attribute that high level of investment and commitment to that process, that slowing down and studying and developing the framework and vision that became, again, that steady foundation, that through line through the change process that really helped us. As we would have different pockets of people push back on the curriculum, we always had our vision and framework to fall back on. We were always able to say, we didn't adopt this curriculum because of what the product is saying. We adopted this curriculum because it represents our belief set for literacy instruction in Aldine ISD. And I think that's a really, really important piece for wherever you are in the process of adopting curriculum. If you are moving toward an HQIM, if you do that in the absence of the collective learning and the vision and framework, then your people will lose sight of that. The curriculum just simply represents what you believe in. They forget that there's a pedagogical process and tenets that are critical to that curriculum. But having the framework is always that safeguard that you can help guide people along. So from there, we're going into our 4th year of curriculum implementation. I still call it implementation because we are continually evolving. And I tell my team quite often that this is an evolution, that we are continuing to improve, because if we don't continue to reflect, have a continuous improvement model, we're going to hit a ceiling of mediocrity going into this 4th year. So what we've realized, though, is that this process for adopting curriculum is an ongoing process. There are so many enabling conditions, so many systems that need to be built around the implementation of curriculum to make it flourish, that we have learned through this process in systems such as collaboration protocols, coaching protocols, an assessment strategy, your professional learning strategy, leadership development, onboarding. How do you onboard new people into your system? Community, parent, and student voice. And that's an area where, if you reflect on what I was saying about our framework, we missed that opportunity in the framework. We didn't bring community in. We didn't bring parents in. We didn't bring students in. Significant missed opportunity that we are now going back to the table and creating systems where we can get parent and community voice, but most importantly, getting student voice and how they are receiving the curriculum, how they're perceiving the curriculum in relation to their learning needs. As I said, we replicated this process the following year with math, and then adopted high quality instructional materials, Eureka and Carnegie, full scale. Last year was our first year for that. And then we have also implemented Odell last year at our high school, which is a whole nother conversation, because what we learned in that was that when we developed our framework for literacy back in 1819, we only focused on pre-K through 8. We didn't bring our high school people in. And so then when we decided, well, they're ready, let's go ahead with Odell last year, we found out that they didn't have that same why as the rest of our district. And again, a very significant missed opportunity for us. So the implementation of Odell was lukewarm last year, but we're not going to lose sight of that. And we're revisiting this process with our high school leaders and our teachers, but all going back to the original framework, but just giving them more training, more communication, and more support around what the framework represents and how that framework is present every day in the Odell curriculum. So that's our journey. I hope that's helpful. If there's any questions, I'm happy to help. I'm sure that there's a lot of things that I missed, a lot of different aspects of the process that I may have overlooked.
Yeah, thank you for that overview. I'm going to kick us off with a question, and then while I'm doing that, would love for y'all to start dropping your own questions in the chat, and we can start kind of elevating those for the rest of our time here. But I'm going to kick us off with, I know that you had started to talk about some of these conditions for success starting this framework development process, and one of those you mentioned was the leadership involvement and leadership being really vulnerable in the process. Are there other things that you would highlight there that really are key criteria or conditions for success going into that collective learning series with the larger committee?
Yeah, I think, again, getting back to making sure that you select the right individuals for the committee, but that the district principals know widely that this is happening. This shouldn't just be happening, behind a curtain. You need to be very, very transparent, and making sure, though, in the process that you make it very clear what our expectation is. I had to, before every single collective learning meeting, I had to come back to revisit the intent and purpose of our meetings. And that was that we were going to develop a vision and framework of literacy instruction in Aldine ISD. And I also emphasized in every single one of those meetings, the high level of responsibility that each one of those individuals on that committee had. They represented a certain role, they represented a certain area in our district, a certain level in our district, and that they needed to make sure that as they were going through the process, that as they were going back into their role, that they were communicating, that they were talking, that they were starting to get feedback from others, and then bring that feedback back into the collective learning. And because as we got into each meeting, not only did I have to set the table every single meeting, I also had to give time at the end of every meeting for people just to kind of breathe and debrief. What are you experiencing? What blind spots might we be experiencing? What's around the corner that we need to get ready for? And a lot of those just opportunities for people to talk through and kind of vision forward as to some of the challenges we may face were really impactful as we started to design and think about the aftermath, that implementation of vision and framework once it was completed.
Awesome, thanks. And all right, I'm going to ask one more and then we'll open it up to questions. I just see one question in the chat, so go ahead and put questions in there and we can start working through them. And I may call you to come off mute and actually ask your question that way as well once we have a couple in the chat here. Can you speak a little bit more to the role that TNTP played specifically in the process and if that evolved even as you guys got better at this over time?
Yeah, they were integral in the collective learning and actually coming in and they led the learning progression in each one of our sessions. It was important to me, and I continually said this also in the meeting. I'm a learner. I'm learning right beside you. We're going to develop this process collectively, but they were very integral in helping us just to experience the process rather than have to be planners and leading the process. When it came to developing the vision and framework, though, that wasn't all we did that internally. We did have some guidance, some kind of thought partnering a little bit with TNTP, but it was really, really important for me that was a framework that was built by Aldine for Aldine, for it to become something that's had the lasting power that it has had.
And thanks. Okay, well, we've got about probably 25 minutes to just ask for you guys to ask Todd questions. I see one in the chat here, and I do want to name that this is really specific to the framework creation process. So I may reframe that question a little bit, Beth, and let me know if this gets at the question you're asking. But how did you guys really use your literacy framework to make a materials adoption decision, knowing that there was so much out there? I know you spoke to that a little bit, but
yeah, that's a really important piece of this. So the 4 tenets of our literacy framework are foundational skills, a systematic foundational skill program, building knowledge, complex text, and integrated reading and writing instruction. So those were the 4 pillars of our literacy framework. And then with that, again, we had assurances, we had commitments, and then role-specific responsibilities. But so it was those 4 key tenets that we went and searched out curriculum. That curriculum needed to match those 4 key tenets. And one thing, though, I did say no piloting. I need to take a step back on that. While we were doing the collective learning and then building the vision and framework, that year of study, we actually did pilot a curriculum in 8 of our campuses. And that curriculum, it's called ARC Core. The reason why at the time we selected that curriculum was that it had a knowledge building piece to it, but it had a balanced literacy structure. Because at the time we thought we needed to stay close to balanced literacy, not take people too far away in order to make this change. But what we found, though, when we completed the collective learning process and the building of the framework, that our core did not have, at the time, did not have that foundational skills that was so critical that we needed in Aldine, that was so absent in Aldine for many, many years. And so that curriculum did not match our vision and framework. So we, after a year of piloting that, we completely stopped that curriculum. And then we went toward what we found, which was, of course, the Amplify CKLA curriculum, which fully represented our framework, and moved that into a broad scale adoption. And I go back and I have to like hug on and love on the principles of those 8 campuses, because that was a hard shift. Imagine we shifted from balanced literacy to ARC Core, and then ARC Core to Amplify, all in a 3-year process. And they did it very, very well. And again, because we were able to go through this process of helping people internalize it is our vision and framework that we need to actualize. The curriculum is the vehicle to do that.
I see a question in the chat about where they can find your literacy framework, and somebody dropped that link. So thank you, Beth, for that. Any other questions? And y'all feel free to drop them in the chat or come off mute here.
So real quickly, the framework that you see on our website, I'm just looking at that now, is actually, that is a overview of our framework. I would be happy to, if anyone would like to, I don't have it right here on this laptop, but to share out our 3-page document that actually shows, again, the commitments, the assurances, so on and so forth.
And Todd, if you're open to that, we can post that as an example on the Math Literacy Framework website as well. I did have one quick question that I think I would love to hear from you from. You know, it sounds like you can move to these big 4 core components of your new framework. Can you just talk about an example of one of the shifts that actually did mean for teachers? So like taking one of those core components and saying, what was the actual instructional difference that teachers had to experience when they were trying to move from the previous work to what they were trying to do with the new implementation?
That's a really good question. And I could actually go through each one of the tenets. The one that comes, there's 2 I'm going to say. Well, the foundational skills is the most apparent. But there was such a need in Aldine, and we were so ready for that wasn't such a dramatic shift for our teachers. The one that we saw that was, as we were doing our communication, that had hit the most resistance was the notion around complex text. And the commitment that our students would experience complex grade level text every single day. But that was the one that was probably our most difficult. But then I also kind of stemmed that into the knowledge building piece of our framework is absolutely, it has changed the learning experience for our students. The excitement around learning in our literacy classrooms, again, the vocabulary that our students are internalizing, conversations, the discourse, the interest in going and experiencing complex text every day because they build that knowledge and that excitement and engagement and learning is really has transformed our classrooms in Aldine.
Thank you for sharing that, and so powerful too, because I know that happens a lot of places and it's hard to come to terms with, but important work to be done. Angie, do you actually want to come off mute and ask your question?
Well, it's actually Shannon. I'm signed in under Angie. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm just Mr. Dave, you were talking about implementing Eureka and Carnegie, just full blown the 2nd year. Just wondering about some of the kickbacks that you had on the math side and in taking them back to the framework, which is probably what you did. How did you handle that?
Yeah, that's again a very good question. Our math framework is a little bit more meaty than our literacy framework, and kind of sometimes hard to navigate and hard to see the connections to the curriculum. So we have to be very explicit. We have to kind of point this to this. This is where you find it in the curriculum. So we've done a lot of communication around that. But really and we're just now going into our 2nd year of Eureka and Carnegie as well. But what we did learn though, and that was one of the most critical pieces early on in implementing the HQIM, was that we needed to build protocols for how teachers work collaboratively together. And so we developed last year, and we really didn't develop them. I had a committee, and I said we need PLC protocols, and they dug deep into all of the curricula and actually found different protocols that we were able to pull together and create as our own. So we have 4 protocols that we've developed that we call they're called CBPLs, curriculum-based professional learning protocols. And the intent of these protocols was to guide professional collaboration, PLCs. We developed them last summer, rolled them out this last fall, and it is one of the most amazing and stickiest, I have a better way of saying it, initiatives that I've ever seen in Aldine. Because by the time we rolled it out in August, we had so much interest that when I would say by the end of September, you never heard PLC anymore. Our PLCs were rebranded and they were called CBPLs, curriculum-based professional learning, because of these 4 protocols. And the protocols are very simply unit unpacking protocol, lesson internalization, lesson rehearsal protocol, and a student work analysis protocol. And we created systems of how and when these protocols were used within that opportunity teachers had to come together and plan. So I'm taking this full circle back to your question, Angie. So when we had the pushback, our biggest pushback for Carnegie and Eureka was the planning piece. And what does that look like and feel like? Because the whole notion when you get into HQIM is there's no longer lesson planning, it's lesson internalization. But how does that look and feel? So when we were able to provide those tangible protocols that teachers could lean on, coaches could lean on, principals could lean on, that really helped teachers kind of gravitate to the curriculum, and that it was not as cumbersome and challenging as it would have been without those protocols. And always happy to share anything that I'm speaking of today.
And
but we didn't write these. We begged, borrowed, and stole from all over, bring those together.
Michelle, do you want to come off mute and ask your question? Oh, okay, I'll ask it. Michelle was asking, what are the biggest changes you have seen in math instruction since implementing the new framework?
I think the biggest change was the level of rigor, quote unquote rigor, challenge, and productive struggle that we saw happening on a daily basis in our classrooms. Again, one of the things that was so prevalent in Aldine was low expectations and low level rigor. And one of the blessings of high quality instructional materials, if implemented well, and if teachers are supported and held accountable for the implementation, then you're basically taking away that opportunity for a teacher to arbitrarily lower expectations for their students, because you have set a coherent level of high expectations across your district. So I can basically say that was the biggest shift, was that we actually saw teachers that were providing challenging experiences for our students, and that students were being provided the opportunity for productive struggle in the classroom. Now, did it happen in every classroom? No, I'm not saying everything I'm saying. I don't want to talk in terms of the generalizations like it's all sunshine and rainbows and all the no. We've got a lot of opportunity to grow, and it's just the fact that I'm able to see it more often than not gives us that excitement and that assurance that we are going to continue to grow and we are going to get things right eventually in every classroom, for every student, every day.
And there's a couple clarifying questions in the chat, so these may be quick hits. One about if you guys have the math framework published similar to your literacy one, and if there's a link for that we can, if you're okay with it, probably send out afterwards.
We can, certainly, yes. We have a overview like you saw for literacy, and then we have the 3-pager. Our other frameworks are still finalizing, science and social studies. We do, like I said, we needed to shift our bilingual programming. We were an early exit district and we needed to move in a new direction. So we replicated this for multilingual, but basically it was to define bilingual practices. And I'm excited to say we are now into year 2 of our rollout of one-way dual language in Aldine ISD. Just a side note.
And then one question about the protocols, that Kristen dropped that in the chat as well for the 4 different components.
Yes.
I was just going to say, we've got about probably 5 more minutes where we can take questions, and then we'll wrap up here for today. So if anybody does have some more questions, I know I can probably ask a couple more, but I don't want to take up all the time here talking as well. So if you guys have any last questions, please drop them in the chat. We probably have time for about 2 or 3 more.
And Leslie, while we're waiting, I just want to make a couple clear connections for folks. So on the Math Literacy Framework website, there's also an option to join some mini sessions that highlight some of the research. And I think if you are interested in joining that, we're going to cover some high-level RLA topics and some high-level math topics, which might give you a little bit of exposure into some of the types of research that Todd has talked about and shared in terms of the shifts in math and RLA, where they've made some focus. The other thing I will call out is there are some notes in this grant around 2 different timeline options, and you can prioritize applying to this grant now and trying to really do this planning in school year 22-23, or you can postpone it and push that out. But for those who choose the first option 1, we are planning to open up a grant in the fall for districts that do want to consider materials implementation as a part of the next step after the framework piece. And in those supports, we really do provide a lot of professional learning specific to the protocols Todd was referencing. So if you, again, are interested in that option 1, what it could look like for your district if it worked with your local timelines was, again, taking a lot of time in school year 22-23 to do a lot of the framework development for your district, and then preparing to apply to a winter grant that would focus on supporting implementation in school year 23-24, where, again, a big focus is doing a lot of the work that Todd spoke to around preparing people to implement materials well, including training on specific protocols. So just wanted to highlight some of those connections in case it helps folks think through locally their decision-making process, as well as highlight that additional opportunity to listen to some of the research that, Leslie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe TNTP will be leading, which is, again, the vendor that Todd's team worked with whenever they were going through that collective learning series.
So just to kind of wrap things up here, when I began my conversation, I said that we had a philanthropic partner that helped us. We couldn't have done it without that. That's why this grant, I think, is so exciting that TEA is offering this. Because over the past 2 years, I've spoken to many districts and superintendents and CAOs about curriculum adoption. But I always have to couch curriculum adoption. Our success has always been as a result of the opportunity for collective learning in the vision framework. And that I can't imagine a district that could adopt HQIM without going through this process. And so the fact that TEA is providing this grant and really the license to take it slow for the long game. You're not playing a short game for a quick fix. This is a long game that changes the system in your district. And the opportunity to do this at whatever size your district is just amazing if you're going to go into this journey of adopting curriculum.
Okay, and I see 2 questions that have rolled in. Y'all are waiting till the very end here to ask them, which is great. But so we'll start with the first one here. And Heidi, if you want to come off mute and ask, you're welcome to do that as well.
Yeah, we as a district have already implemented, actually fully implemented Eureka and Carnegie K-8. We were really already a Carnegie district, but it was a supplemental instructional process, but we went all in this year. Great support from Carnegie. We are also implementing Eureka. So we had partial implementation last year, but we're going with a full implementation this year. Our teachers, we did a lot of piloting. So my interest in the grant opportunity was wrapped around, we're rolling it out, but we know we need some support. We're a smaller school district, so we don't have as many resources typically as larger school districts do, but our teachers still need that same level of support. And I would like to build something that is sustainable over time. So I'm just hoping, because we're already, down that pathway, that won't change our opportunity.
No, I think it would be exciting for your team to go back, now that you actually experienced the curriculum, to have them study deeply, what does it represent? And the why did we implement this, and why are we going to continue to hold tightly to this as you move forward? Again, it's about playing that long game.
Right.
So that the frameworks, like I think I've said this probably 20 times, they become that anchor, that through line. I often call them, there are tools for coherence throughout our district that don't allow any of our teachers to lower expectations. in any of our classrooms.
Thank you.
And Kristen just put a follow-up here in the chat to that as well. But on our next panel, we will have Todd back here with us, but we're also going to have Lubbock ISD join us. And they did kind of what you're talking about, Heidi, of actually piloting Amplify first, and then went back and revisited building out a literacy framework. So I think there'll be one that's going to be great to listen in on as well. And we will end on the last question here in the chat, which I think is great too for those that are considering looking at the application and deciding which framework or both frameworks to focus on for this grant opportunity. And Beth's question was, did you all construct the math and literacy framework simultaneously or over a couple years?
It was over a couple of years. We began with the literacy framework, and because of the success that we saw of that, we knew that we needed to jump right in and do math. And that's at that time also, we knew that TEA, this is when the Texas Home Learning was coming out and that there were resources available. And we wanted to make sure we got ahead of that as much as we could. So we did it the following year. And then this past year, we finalized science and social studies frameworks. Curriculum adoption is not necessarily on the horizon yet. We need to make sure that our system is ready for any more curriculum adoptions right now. But potentially they will serve also as our anchor for that.
And one quick note there, you can apply for one math or literacy or even both as a part of this process. And let's say you choose one now. Again, we are planning to open this back up as a grant in the fall if you wanted to choose one now and plan to apply for a second later. So there's a couple ways you can think about using the grant for your own context based on how quickly you want to go with both and or if there's a particular area you want to prioritize. And we're hoping again to continue to have that option to allow districts to do a second later, but again, always dependent on capacity and funding. But again, that's the hope, is that we can support as many districts as possible that develop both.
My last little piece of advice, if you're going to enter into this, our superintendent was 100% committed and behind us. And that was one of the strongest support structures that I could have asked for. So I would just encourage them to make sure you have looped in your superintendent and you've got a partner in this work. They don't have to be involved in every minute of every collective learning, but our superintendent would lead every meeting with something around literacy and the focus on literacy during that time. And it really helped us through the change process.
Awesome. Well, huge thank you, Todd, for spending the last hour with us and just sharing your insights and the path that Aldine ISD took to do this work. I know you mentioned this several times, but this is going to look different for all districts. In a small district, it's going to look a little different than it will in Aldine ISD, and other big districts will probably navigate it a little bit different than they did. So part of this process too is figuring out if you apply for the grant and are awarded with your approved vendor, what this process should look like for your district, and making sure that you guys are customizing in a way where it's really going to be successful and you feel like you can leave this grant to actually adopt and implement this new framework where it's driving a lot of change within your district. So thank you guys again for coming out today. Hopefully this was helpful. I'll just leave you guys with the schedule for, again, some upcoming opportunities. We will have 2 more of these panels. So we'll have, again, Todd back with us for our next panel, and we'll also have Lubbock ISD joining us. And then we'll have a slightly different crew in our August date as well. So make sure those are in your calendars if you want to continue to listen in and just hear some different perspectives. Kristen highlighted this as well, but starting this week, we are going to kick off some short sessions that are just a taste of some of the research that Todd mentioned in the collective learning that Aldine took. And it'll be representative of some of the collective learning that your district may also engage in this grant as well. So please feel free to sign up for those. We'll have them going for math and for RLA, and the sessions will last about an hour and a half long. And we're trying to structure everything around lunchtime. So hopefully this is a good time for you to bring your lunch and just kind of listen in and learn. Outside of that, we will be having an opportunity for you guys to sign up for a one-on-one consult. So if it's easier to just sit down with myself or a member of the team and talk through this, we're happy to do that. We'll send out this link to everybody that was here afterwards. And then if you do have any other questions, feel free to reach out. But appreciate you guys taking the time today. All right.